Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For those who are with us here today, I'm Ashwath. I lead business development for the real estate and finance lines of business at Nakisa. Welcome to our first official webinar of 2026 and the one focused on real estate leadership. And thank you for joining us live today. I know it's a busy period, so appreciate everybody being here in person. 2026, jumping right in, seems to be a year commercial real estate leaders are moving decisively, and a few recurring mandates are appearing across enterprises, operating both in public and private sectors. Elements like reducing costs, improving efficiencies, and making the commercial real estate organization resilient to waves of technology and workforce changes are front and center in many leaders' minds. We'll be unpacking these trends today, and I have two experts in the field with me to explore both strategic and operational concepts that might work reliably for you, our audience, irrespective of your spheres of influence. So please stay until the end. We'll also be sharing some takeaways and action items for the near term. So with that, I'll jump right in. Firstly, let me introduce our speakers. We have Kevin. Kevin, honored to have you with us. Kevin is a partner at Deloitte, and he is a leader of the National Real Estate Advisory Practice. He brings nearly 4 decades of leadership in Canadian public service. As former Assistant Deputy Minister of Real Property Services at the Public Services and Procurement Canada, Kevin oversaw one of the largest and most complex real estate property portfolios in the country. And he has also shaped Canada's public sector infrastructure landscape from the inside, including helping stand up Shared Services Canada. And today he advises senior leaders on strategy, transformation, and modernization at Deloitte. Kevin, happy to have you with us.
Thanks, Ashwath. Great to be here. And thanks for using the 1990 stock photo there in the picture too. Appreciate that. Always a pleasure working with you and with Robert. And thanks to you, Ashwath, and to Daria for pulling this together. Look forward to the session today.
Likewise, likewise. We also have Robert Nardi, Chief Operating Officer at Nakisa with us today. Robert, equally pleased to have you with us. Robert brings a rare combination of operational and deep financial governance expertise to Nakisa. He is leading company-wide transformation in the AI era, which I'm sure must be super exciting for you, Robert. And Robert aligns product innovation and our operating model and strategies to help our clients across the globe modernize, right, with the right level of discipline and speed. Before this, Robert was also a partner at Deloitte, where he led major audit and assurance engagements across Canada, advising some of the most complex organizations. And I'm sure, Robert, that gives you a powerful vantage point into the Fortune 1000 organizations and their models. Robert, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ashwath, and it's a real pleasure. A pleasure to be here with Kevin. Contrary to Kevin, I think the picture they used is a recent one and not one of 20 years ago. But it's okay. But I'm really honored to be here and really excited to be here and have a great conversation with you, Kevin and Ash.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. All right, let's dive right in. So looking back over the last 24, 36 months, let's say the commercial real estate industry, of course, was initially defined by a wait and see approach. Leaders were paralyzed by uncertainty regarding, for instance, interest rates, hybrid work policies, unstable cost structures playing in, and also fluid property valuations. But as we enter 2025 and 2026, it appears like the era of waiting is over. We're now operating in a bit of a different reality, one where decisions can no longer be deferred, it looks like, thanks in part to AI, and focused execution matters more than ever. So Robert, maybe curious to get your high-level perspective on this before we jump into specific areas.
Yeah, and I think these are exciting times. And I think what's changed over the last 24 months is that uncertainty is no longer the dominant story in commercial real estate, right? And it's all about execution. And what we're hearing consistently in our conversations with clients, and you mentioned we tend to work with Fortune 1000 organizations, is just how difficult it has been to truly connect the physical dimension of real estate and the human dimension of work. And so for years, those worlds operated in parallel, and today they have to operate as one system. And so one clear signal of that shift is structural, right? And there was an interesting stat that we saw where a third of CRE teams are now reporting into HR rather than finance or operations. And that forces a very different definition of value. And this is a significant change, and it's not an easy one. And so the CER leader of 2026 is operating right at the intersection of the CFO's discipline and the CHRO's experience mandate. And AI is accelerating this because decisions which once took months of analysis can now happen in near real time. And so as AI removes the excuse to wait, CRE is also shifting from a passive cost center to an active decision engine for the enterprise. And so I'm really curious to see how the year will play out, but it is a trend we've been seeing.
Yeah, no, very well said. And you're right in that even where there was a bit of a pilot overload and restrictive investments on the technology side, those have kind of expanded out into more broader plays. So Kevin, thoughts on what Robert shared?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Robert mentioned. When I think about real estate in today's day and age, I think about it kind of in three levels, like the strategic level that Robert was talking a lot about from a CFO and a CHRO perspective around how you're managing the portfolio, but more importantly now, how are you ensuring that the portfolio is productive for those folks that are within it, whether that's retail or office or other. I think that strategic look. And then there's that focus on capital as well. Are you making the right decisions? How much is it's, I think it's less so, or a trend on how much are you spending as opposed to are you spending in the right places, and do you have the data to support that? And Robert mentioned, he didn't use these words because he's much more eloquent than I, but sort of a research project, right? Where you used to have to dig into your portfolio, look at your assets, look at their condition. Now you're starting to look at the assets also from a functional perspective, and how do you make better decision making? So that's kind of all happening at the strategic level. But what's happening at the working level and sort of the tactical level of real estate is those facility managers and asset managers and project advisors and those folks that are on the ground executing day-to-day operations. They used to feed these beasts called ERPs. Now we're also seeing technology that's much more feature rich, that's much more focused on the actual person in the field doing the day-to-day work around the assets. And the question is getting those business requirements right, not only so that you can give the CFO and the CHRO the data that they need, but that you have the data to lead your day-to-day operations as well. So I think that's kind of a macro trend as well. And at the core is asset management. And again, thinking as more of an operator and coming from an operator background, thinking about, are you doing too much preventative maintenance or too little? Are you seeing changes in your corrective maintenance or your reactive maintenance? How reliable is your equipment? All of that's happening on the day-to-day tactical level, and those professionals, real estate professionals, want to have the data to make the best decisions going forward. So whether they're feeding a budget process or they're actually sitting in front of the C-suite, they have the data that they need to make the good business case as assets are aging to make that case for capital. And then I think the other pivot just around the year of experimentation and year of discipline optimization is, I think a lot of capital investment went into sustainability initiatives. Mm-hmm. And I think the days of getting that operational return is kind of over. A lot of that investment has happened. People are just looking more at cost takeout generally. So making large capital investments just to save on greenhouse gas reduction, it's kind of pivoting and focusing as well to productivity in the workplace. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that, as the meeting progresses.
Absolutely. No, that's really great, Kevin. And as you very well put it, data-backed realism is becoming more and more important instead of just, pie in the sky forecasts or macro analysis. And that's what we'll be unpacking across the different trends we'll be studying shortly. But before that, it sets the stage very well to understand where our audience's heads are at as well. So let's open up a poll. And we have our amazing product marketer, Daria, who's helping us from the background. So Daria, over to you to kick us off there. So which areas are top priorities? We'd be very curious to understand across these 4 dimensions we'll be looking at today to Robert's and Kevin's statements earlier. So if you could take a second to respond here. It'll help us along the way. Great. We're seeing some good response rates, and cost and portfolio growth, very rightly so, are competing with one another very closely. Cost is leading by a bit of a margin. Another maybe 10 seconds. Right, so we have over 43% focused on cost, around 30% on strategic portfolio growth, and process optimization. Surprisingly, occupant experience is taking a little bit of a backseat, but we'll
it is a little
talk about that.
surprising. Sorry, Ash, I think it is a little surprising, but I think we're going to talk about that a little more. And so I'd be curious to see the discussion between Kevin and myself on that. But yeah, I was a little surprised that it's so low, or it's not
Yeah.
as top priority.
Indeed. Well, let's take up the audience's area of focus, cost, and let's jump into our first trend, which is capital disciplined approach. So I read this interesting survey recently released to commercial real estate and FM leaders, which showed that over 80% prioritize cost efficiency stepping out of 2025. And interestingly, occupant experience came quite close to cost, to your point earlier. If we take an example, Canadian office vacancy, for instance, is at a high, right, at 18%. And also some public sector organizations have claimed to halve their spaces. But you'll see 85% of occupiers across the board on the workforce side, paradoxically, still expect better amenities, better landlord support, and RTO is at an all-time high post-pandemic. So maybe as we jump in, my question for myself is, how do you consciously shrink portfolios while investing more per square footage in experience and reliability? So Kevin, maybe if you could take the office subsector, is this reconciliation even possible between cost and what the workplace and the workforce demand?
Yeah, no, great question. And I would say that in my role as the head of real estate in the public sector, and before that, actually managing all back office IT, I never met a vendor or a landlord that didn't want the best for the occupiers that are inside the building. So let's just kind of set that out straight. But, there was an article in the National Post this morning, and it was on the news about, the decision recently in the federal public sector to send people back to the office, right? And, just 2 years ago, we were talking about hybrid work, and there was budget announcements around a 50% reduction in an overall portfolio, et cetera. And, Canada Lands Company was working for a minister in public works, and now they pivoted and they're working for a different minister, and they're aligned with Build Canada Homes and CMHC. So lots of change that's going on in major provinces. You're starting to see this pivot back to the office. And so who knows if the portfolio is actually going to be reduced by 50%. And the return to office kind of pivots, and we didn't mention it here in our discussion, but I think it pivots around whether the favor is in the place of the employer or the employee. So when the economy is moving and the people have choice on where they can work, et cetera, you might seem to get a pivot around where you're going to work and what your return to office or number of mandated days in the office are, versus when the economy is not doing as well and there's some uncertainty in the market when people are coming back to the office. So I think it's an ever-changing thing, and I think it's swayed back to the employer favor, and you're starting to see people being asked to come to the office. And the question really is around, are those offices functional and can people be productive in them? And you see in the market anything from reservation systems or from badging information and data that's giving you some idea of occupancy. But occupancy used to be, hey, if this building can support 5,000 people in it and 5,000 people are assigned to it, it's 100% occupied. As opposed to what you're seeing now, which is kind of in many C-suite discussions that we're having, where the C-suite is saying, well, we're not sure if everybody's back at the office or not. We're not sure we can trust the badging data, and we're not sure about our reservation system if it's given accuracy, or they have legacy sensors that are around that are telling them the dynamic utilization, very different from occupancy. The utilization is actually in the neighborhood of 30% or 40%. You have department heads, whether that's in higher ed, public sector, or in the private sector. The problems are very similar. The challenges are very similar around how many people are actually coming in. And then you get complaints from folks that say, well, I got to travel for an hour to get to the office. I got to travel back. Then I get there and everything's all blocked up. Yet the reservation system doesn't release empty desks for an hour or something. So that, you lose an hour productivity. So I guess to get to the question really, which is around the office vertical and is the reconciliation possible? I think it is, but it used to be kind of it used to be a sensitive topic to talk about productivity in the office. And productivity is certainly the trend now that everybody's talking about now. So where you used to work at home, and if you're in the insurance business and you could process 6 insurance claims a day, then you come to the office, you can't find your desk for a couple hours, you're in a crowded workspace, now you can only do 2 a day. But the employers are also saying that why is it on Fridays that we're only processing 1 a day as opposed to 6 the rest of the week? And I'm not picking on the insurance industry here. I'm just using it almost hypothetically as a case where employers, when they're starting to look at productivity stats, they're starting to see a 4-day work week versus a 5-day work week. And I think what you're seeing around the professionals in CRE of asset management, you're starting to see asset managers not just concerned about the condition of the building. Do you have a modern workplace? Do you have the right desks? Do you have the right technology? But they're getting more concerned about, is it actually a productive workspace for the teams that I'm supporting? And that pivot that you talked about in your earlier question, where Robert talked about CRE teams moving into more of a workplace type role under HR, I think the functional side, although it didn't come out in our last poll, that productivity side, that functional side is going to become very important. So I think the reconciliation is possible, but I'm not convinced that every office building is equipped to be a productive workplace that has the right balance of autonomous workspace, sort of collaborative workspace, or team kind of where you can kind of sit down at a meeting room and make decisions. I'm not convinced all offices are set up that way, but that certainly is the focus of many of our clients.
And the point around, sorry, actually, the point around productivity, I think that is something, that's how we run our business as well. But just as an anecdote, and I think Ash, you and I were in New York City last fall, and we were speaking with a large bank, and they were struggling with, and I think they were mandated to go back 5 days a week, and they were struggling with the accuracy of sort of the badging system, but more importantly, it was about people just coming in, locking themselves in a room the whole day. And so it kind of defeats the purpose, right? If you're not collaborating with your teams, and all you're doing is taking virtual calls all day, whether you're in the office or at home, it's the same thing. And so that's the behavior aspect I think needs to change, where if you're coming to the office, the whole point is you should be collaborating, you should be meeting with your teams, right? And that also has a large impact on productivity. And it's not easy to do, right? When you look at large organizations that are basically global and they sit everywhere in the world, that is another dimension that makes it challenging, right? So as a real estate leader, how do you reconcile, okay, I've got a physical location in a particular city with a different profile of employee or different departments that may not even physically sit in the same place, right? So I think that's also one of the key challenges to making sure that becomes a productive exercise.
And Robert, given our significant retail presence, I'll also be curious to ask you, how are retailers dealing with capital discipline, especially where time to market and margins are much more important?
Yeah, I mean, for retailers, the conversation is a little different, right? So I think the tension you're describing is exactly what leaders are living right now, right? So cost discipline, and we saw it, it's a clear top priority. But in retail, especially where you're managing margins, speed still determines competitiveness, right? So the real question isn't just how to spend less, but it's how to execute capital with far greater precision and speed and quality. And so what we're seeing with many retailers is a shift away from the legacy model. So in the old way, capital planning, construction, facilities, and real estate, those all operated in silos. And that separation created delays, it created cost overruns, it wasn't productive, and ultimately it slowed time to market for new stores. Today, we're in a more forward-looking sort of organization where they're actually connecting all those capital decisions to operational excellence and execution. And so, they're integrating lease data, they're monitoring construction progress, facilities performance, having that financial visibility in a single view of execution. And so that impact is or could be significant, and it's not just tighter controls over construction budgets, but it's also, how do you open stores weeks earlier than you did before? And in retail, that creates immediate revenue and a competitive advantage. And so I think that discipline, we're also seeing it through far more data-driven site selections for retail. And they're combining internal sales performance with external foot traffic, market analytics, and this is nothing new, but I think it's going to be accentuated to make faster leasing decisions with greater confidence. And so capital discipline today isn't just about spending less, it's about making those decisions earlier, turning capital into real business outcomes faster.
That's great. Let's maybe next jump into the how. I think there were certain elements that popped out, especially as it relates to data and technology. So those would be the next two trends we'll be analyzing. So if we jump and shift our focus to data as a next element, for years, commercial real estate data fed into finance. Real estate and facilities mainly supplied figures to ERPs, if I can put it that way, for reporting and compliance. And this, of course, is no longer true. The portfolio itself has become a primary source of what's being called operational intelligence, or more largely decision intelligence. Conditions, costs, risks, etc., are now captured very evidently, continuously, and also analyzed directly at source or close to source. And tech platforms are also not just recording activity. It looks like tech platforms are kind of mandated to generate insights and guide portfolio actions for every element of the value chain. So, Kevin, maybe from your vantage point, working with clients and partners across different sectors, does that framing of where we're moving from data to support to data to lead resonate with you? And where do you see that play out in a couple of areas?
I think it absolutely resonates with me, and I love the caption of data to lead versus data to report. And I think it's reflective of where we were as an organization or as CRE professionals sort of 15 years ago, where there was a couple trends that kind of influenced where we are today. One of them was a focus on large ERPs. And these large ERPs were coming out and they were subsuming legacy applications and that type of thing. And they were really focused on a top-down driven cost takeout type piece, but around the CIO organization having less legacy applications to manage. And the outcome of that was many disparate data systems at the working level. Remember, we talked a little bit earlier about sort of strategic real estate, operational, executing on capital, and then that tactical day-to-day. Well, it's not unusual when we go into markets that we find many point solutions, if you will, in the marketplace where those large ERPs simply weren't meeting the needs of the day-to-day operators. And as a result of that, there were databases that were formed, Excel spreadsheets, black books to manage projects, etc. And that's starting to be circumvented by this look at data and these integrated workplace management systems. And then the second phase was that a lot of large asset holders were kind of pushing out into the marketplace that outsourced service delivery component as well. So in many cases, the large asset holders made the decision to bring in an integrated facility management service provider because of the size, economies of scale, et cetera, because the price of managing the data or the cost of managing day-to-day is really about rolling trucks. And if you're doing that internally, but you could move that out and get the economy of scale of a large provider, you would make those types of decisions. But the real part that happened 10 to 15 years ago with that push of moving your data for your assets was now being controlled outside of the organization or within a large ERP, that where the data might not necessarily be trusted at the working level, is that you kind of started to lose accountability. And by accountability of CRE professionals, it was like Robert mentioned his introduction, you needed these research projects to actually find out where you were with respect to your portfolio and the condition of your portfolio. Or you saw very static budgets, and maybe this will resonate with some of the audience, where you get $5 million a year for capital and $20 million a year for operate, make it work. As opposed to, well, now the asset's 20 years older. And that type of directive, it just won't work. So CRE professionals now, the data-supported, data-led CRE operators, what CRE professionals are looking for is, how do I have visibility on the data? If it was outsourced, maybe my outsourced service provider starts feeding me with that data now. Or maybe I have an integrated workplace management system that the outsourced provider provides input into. But the real key is for those that are more insourced and doing it themselves, how are they managing the data in an integrated way? So the data that comes from doing a capital project or doing sort of your design build part, when you move into the operate maintain, all of that data slides over for the operator as well, who typically is a different team that's going to manage the facilities going forward. So I think that accountability around having visibility, having accurate information, but also having control levers that you can help support either an intervention with your integrated facility management service. And they all want to help here, by the way. Robert was just mentioning, retail. Well, typically in my experience with retail, there isn't a building automation system that's providing all of the day-to-day data that you can sort and you can feed from. But I do know that the large integrated facility management service are starting to connect small buildings, and they're looking at ways that they can bring data to them so they can help limit when they're rolling trucks, or minimize or optimize when they're rolling trucks to actually do repairs and or preventative cycles, so they have optimal routes, et cetera, all with the aim of keeping costs down. So that was kind of a long answer, but and I could go on, but maybe we'll give Robert a shot here. But absolutely, people are starved for data, but it's data to lead to support decision-making at the day-to-day. And I'll leave you with one last just small example before I give it back to Robert. We were talking with a large city that had many different regions, so all reporting it to different mayors, that were using an ERP to manage water treatment and plants and sewage, et cetera, et cetera. And the system was legacy and had been around for a while. But the day-to-day facility people worked in separate offices from sort of the corporate real estate management that was in head office. And the head office was getting the data that they needed to actually make their reports, et cetera. But the facility managers simply were using other point solutions and or black books and Excel spreadsheets to manage the assets on the ground. And so bringing the corporate team together with the day-to-day facility, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a system problem, you have a process problem. So I love that in that opening poll where people talked about optimizing process. How do you optimize process at the working level such that it's data to lead and they can actually leverage these systems to advantage and get insights to advantage? I know we're going to talk more about that, but that's the exciting part of this particular trend. Over to you, back to you, Ashwath.
Great. And so visibility, accountability, and control lever. So Robert, I'm going to let you wear your audit and assurance hat. And with data leading decisions, who owns portfolio strategy? Is it the operators or the algorithms? And is there a balance that we should be cognizant of, especially as a software company building AI products?
Yeah. And I just want to maybe go back on some of the comments that Kevin made. And I find this fascinating because we've got we've got several organizations that are at different maturity stages, right? And you've got some that completely outsourced their real estate, and now they're actually considering in-housing or insourcing it. And it's all about the data and having access to the data. But then, funny enough, you also have organizations that are immature and are thinking about now outsourcing that same type of service. But I think the difference is now, because of that data being so important, that they need to sort of, if you're going to outsource, you can't do it in the traditional way, right? And so you need access to that data. You need more visibility, because ultimately that should feed into how you make your decisions, right? And so I'm completely aligned with you, Kevin. It's an interesting era right now, but interesting times for us. So Ash, in terms of your comment, yeah, I mean, I strongly echo that framing. In our conversations with clients, this shift from again, data supporting decisions to data actually leading execution, it's no longer a theory, right? And so it's very visible in day-to-day operations. If I look at an example, a recent example of one of our clients, where they had a significant acquisition, and so all of a sudden they had a fairly large real estate portfolio, and they used that moment to not just integrate the portfolios, but to fundamentally rethink how they manage the data. And I think the comment around process optimization is clearly is clear in this situation. And instead of treating real estate and facility data as something captured, again, mainly for reporting and compliance, which brings me back to my Deloitte days, it's now shifting towards real-time operational intelligence, right? And using combined portfolio to guide day-to-day execution, risk visibility, cost control. I think that's what the pattern we're seeing. And so we're seeing it in three practical ways, right? So organizations are moving to demand-led operations, right? So when you're looking at real-time occupancy, usage data, these are automatically adjusting their services, their space utilization, energy consumption. We talked a little bit about that before. Really improving the cost efficiencies. Second is going beyond traditional dashboards and reporting, right, towards true decision intelligence. And so surfacing lease risks, cost anomalies, optimization opportunities, and that's something we're seeing quite often, and recommending specific actions rather than just waiting for analysts to find them. And then the third, and you mentioned this, Kevin, around sort of maintenance shifting from reactive to predictive, right? How do you leverage the asset data, and how do you leverage AI to anticipate those sort of failures and intervene before that disruption occurs? And so what's important is that this doesn't remove the operator. If anything, it's now elevating their role. And so, the algorithms can execute the what and the when, but humans still need to define the why, right? And so the risk posture, the experience, ambition, the long-term portfolio strategy, those are still going to be human-led.
That's great. So it looks like the future operating model is a human agent team in the age of decision intelligence, where algorithms own tactical decisions, but the operator owns the strategic risk and the portfolio vision. That's great. That's great. This brings us into technology. I'm also cognizant of time, so I'll kind of take us into the next trend. I've personally been in the prop tech space for close to a decade now, thanks to some of the opportunities both on the occupier and the owner-operator sides. And the metaphor of Frankenstein tech stack has deeply resonated with me. Many of my past clients, for example, made peace with archaic commercial real estate systems, mainly because of lack of knowledge or lack of disruptive alternatives at different points in time. But I'm sure you've both seen one too many times how technology for commercial real estate has been scarily a bit of an afterthought for many organizations. But with AI, and in the context of everything that's happening, that afterthought is falling apart, right? We're looking at, if you see the graphic on the left-hand side, how when AI projects are initiated, Robert, to your statement earlier, when there are fragmented tools and siloed modules, there are very limited possibilities. But then when you're looking at AI within a unified digital spine, then the integrations compound innovation. So just kind of playing on that note, why is 2026 in particular, Robert, the year where the Frankenstein model can hopefully be replaced? And what does the new AI native model look like in your lens?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually one of the parts we see as being quite exciting, right? And yeah, I do think the Frankenstein stack metaphor it resonates well, right? Because I think everyone in this space has lived it in the past. But for years, CRE organizations stitched together legacy systems, Excel spreadsheets, point solutions, and simply because there were no alternatives, right? There weren't, I would say, the kind of disruptive alternatives that we're now seeing. And so the operating model just learned to tolerate that fragmentation, and it was very inefficient. And this is sort of the exciting part, and this is how I think AI is transforming this trend. And what's changed in 2026 is that AI now has the capability of made fragmentation operational unsustainable, right? And so most organizations now have AI initiatives underway, and we all see it, but very few are seeing the enterprise value. Not because the algorithms are not powerful enough, because AI can't deliver meaningful outcomes on disconnected, inconsistent data, right? So the real shift we're seeing is that AI is forcing that platform unification, right? And I think whoever has that platform is able to leverage platform unification the most is going to win. And so data governance and integration have become the price of admission, and that's different. And at the same time, leaders don't have the luxury of waiting for perfectly unified environments. They need decision intelligence that can create value across today's fragmented reality, while guiding the organization toward a truly unified digital spine, right? And so you talked about, what does the AI native technology look like? I think that this is the exciting transformation that is already happening. We're seeing it with our clients, or I'm seeing it with our clients. And an example of that is, an organization which we're collaborating right now. They're now in a major portfolio transition, right? As the catalyst to modernize their platform, and they're connecting finance operations on a shared data foundation, and they're moving from a reactive decision making to continuous real-time visibility across their assets, and that's huge. And it's complex. But if they get it right, this is huge. This is going to change the way they do things. And it's not only the technology upgrade, right? It's a completely different way of operating. I'm going to come back to the poll where we talked about process optimization and process change. And the benefits are significant: faster upgrades, smoother deployment, but also the ability to make decision making in real time. And so when real estate, finance, and operations finally work from that sort of shared digital spine, the impact is very tangible. And so again, I'm quite excited about the transformation that's going to happen in this year and in coming years. And again, very excited to see how it plays out.
Kevin, curious about your perspective, especially I know you mentioned during our preparation that this cannot be treated as greenfield. I made personal notes about that. So please.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I love that, Robert. That was beautiful how you pulled that together around, the finance, you operate the CRE, the client team. Unfortunately, sometimes in market, you still see, the CRE team potentially working in isolation from the finance team and almost just being responsive to it. But their, multiple systems make it very challenging for them to budget, or if they interpret data one way, it kind of throws off their whole process, and it gets very frustrating. And with some of the cost takeout measures that are going on in market as well, it also is, it's a bit disturbing, right? In a sense that the facility management teams are overworked. Usually you don't have enough people on their teams, et cetera. And the answer isn't, let's hire another 100 people, et cetera. It's more, how can you, so I get to where we usually start in consulting. And again, I agree with everything you said about aligning those stakeholders. That's exactly what should be happening. But it's almost like, what's that target operating model going forward? And almost the degree to which you can leverage AI, it's almost commensurate with your readiness to actually use data. And so when I said it's not greenfield, I mean that if you're starting from a greenfield and you have no data, well, what's the AI going to play with, right?
Yeah.
And or if your data, you don't trust it, do you really want to put that in a model when it's untrusted data to get insights from it, et cetera? So that target operating model around people, around bringing those organizations together is sort of our first way of looking at it. The second way is, of course, people, process, technology. The second one being process. And it was interesting that in our first poll, they talked about process optimization and client. It's not like lease administration or facility management that it isn't difficult to find out what's a best practice there.
Yeah.
And sometimes those that we're working with, they're not working in best practice simply because of the organizational construct they have or the demands that they have around feeding some other process that was kind of pushed on top of them as opposed to leveraging. So that's process side. And then the third, of course, is technology, which comes after the fact. By optimizing process, you start to really understand what's important and what those business requirements are. And then typically, Deloitte, we can go out into the marketplace and look at what's the right technology to bring forward. And is that an integrated workplace management system that's all integrated, or is it bits and pieces? And, we've worked with major provinces that have made decisions to take complexity in projects where, say, they're working on large public-private partnerships and innovative financing and to support, say, building a hospital versus more DBFOM, type design, build, finance, operate, maintain type projects that are more hands-on, to small works projects that are part of the corrective maintenance and preventative maintenance cycle. And they decided to go with, we need a project management information system to help manage across all of these projects. So we're leveraging best practice and continually innovating and improving going forward. And that innovation happens at the working level. Like, there's nothing worse than being involved as a project manager for many, many, I'll just say decades, and then have somebody from a C-suite decide how projects and process should work, as opposed to you being able to on the ground leverage your experience and innovate. And I think C-suites want to foster that innovation as well. Yeah. And this is where AI and, Ashwath and I are doing a small pilot with a large FSI client, where we took, leases in different languages, global operations, and we could pull those leases into, from a repository, create a new repository, and glean insights from, do we have strategic partners? Should we be thinking about different things strategically to the day-to-day? Are the clauses, et cetera, terms and conditions, the right things for this global entity going forward? So I don't know, I guess for me, when I think about aligning stakeholders, I loved how you covered that, but also that, prioritizing data governance, you said as well, like, it's not for the faint of heart. You need to understand how you're going to manage data and how you're going to put a governance piece around that. And very important to get the working level involved in that. Here's the data we need to lead day to day, and here's how it will feed your capital programming. Here's how it will feed your prioritization of managing risk. Here's how it will feed sort of our financial and budgeting information. But here's how it's helping us also manage day to day and make insights so we can innovate, et cetera. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, it is. Thank you, Kevin. And I'm sure that's given a lot of thought to our audiences in terms of their tech stack and their data integrity and situation. So maybe we open up another quick poll. We'd be very curious to understand the prevalent technology stacks within this group. Thank you, Daria. We maybe take another 10, 15 seconds to get some responses. Great. We have more than a third of the responses. And I'm seeing a balance between two extremes. We are seeing a lot of fragmentation and point solutions, but also a lot of lack of clarity, which tells me, in a way, maybe there are more point solutions in place by teams, by functions, but fully integrated AI readiness, there's a lot of room there in terms of the different organizations. So right now we're looking at about 40% fragmented point solutions, 30% probably in connection to it, but functional teams and functional solutions maintained, and partial integrations and full integrations are probably 30% together.
Yeah. It'd be interested in knowing when that partial integration happened. Was it recent? Was it a decade ago? Because you have differing degrees of readiness, right? You have people all working with point solutions, and then you have some that have maybe the asset management group has brought in the facility management and the property management group to start looking at, the condition of assets, et cetera, and tagging things and starting to put a program and plan, which means kind of partially integrated. But that could have just happened over the last couple of years, right?
True. Yeah. And I know participants are not able to respond now, but if you'd like to shoot us a note at any point, certainly feel free to, and we'd be happy to engage in follow-up conversations as well, if this sounds resonant.
Yeah. Kevin, I'd be curious on your thoughts. So specifically with the fact that, the 38% indicated that they're mostly fragmented point solutions. I guess then if we think about the optimal targeting operating model, which both you and I discussed, I wonder if that's too ambitious, right? Given where they may be at, given where their data's fragmented across a whole bunch of different, like we mentioned, technology, point solutions, all that type of stuff, Excel. Is that targeting operating model too ambitious?
No, I think it's a journey, right? I think a target operating model could be 4 or 5 years out. I'll use an example, maybe that might be helpful. So, it's not unusual when we have very large asset holders that are, say, global, that have sort of a regional construct for how they manage CRE. And they may have contracts that support lease administration, or they have an integrated facility management service provider, et cetera, but it's regional. And when you start thinking about AI and how it can help you optimize the portfolio, if the regional groups are kind of managing everything differently, or there isn't a common enterprise practice, it's going to take a while to kind of migrate towards more of an enterprise global type solution set, if you will, for data governance going forward. An optimal lease for a branch or for a retail store looks like this. An optimal construction fit out project for this type of store makes this kind of sense. These types of layouts work best in the insurance sector, and these are our market templates on how we're going to set up floor space, et cetera, and how is that working in data. So what we are seeing, and we didn't talk about it from trends here, but it does relate directly to fragmented tech stacks, is on global, particularly global asset holders or large asset holders. If somebody's even national in Canada, they may manage Quebec as a region, and then Western Canada as a region, and the North as a region, or Ontario if there's a large concentration in Ontario region, et cetera. So I think that target operating model, how you manage assets, to me, should never be regional, right? Like, and maybe I'm wrong,
100%.
but an asset is an asset is an asset. And how you optimize that asset and limit your deferred maintenance liability, et cetera, and optimize your operating spend and optimize your capital spend, you should be thinking about those assets at an enterprise scale. So there's pros and cons of that. If you say have assets that are in remote locations, does that mean that you have a whole separate vendor management system for managing that asset that you can only get to by air in the wintertime? Or is it part of an enterprise solution and it's managed almost as a separate asset, but you're still following best practices to manage that? Or do you prioritize around, stores, as you mentioned, Robert, that are more, getting high volume, high throughput, et cetera, and sustaining those versus ones that are smaller? And then you get into the asset holders that are government or quasi-government elements that have differing sort of outcomes that they're looking for, like social procurement or pushing regional distribution of vendors, et cetera, to support those assets and enable those assets, or, reconciliation, et cetera. You might not see that as strongly in the private sector market, et cetera, but there's all kinds of things that would shape the target operating model. Sort of a long answer, so apologize for that.
No, that's great. It even brings us into a pretty interesting section, which is our rapid fire. The first question is going to be about our target operating model. So, Kevin, maybe just in 15 seconds, if I may, is an incremental operating model redesign enough around AI, or is there a structural reset needed? I think I already know the answer based on what you just mentioned, but just for the audience's sake.
Yeah, it's a great question. So 15 seconds, I would say, it depends on the market and it depends on the structure that you're trying to support. But I do think that an incremental model is the way to achieve success and manage incomes, as opposed to a big bang that might take, 4 or 5 years to implement in a very large. So I would take small bites, small gains, et cetera. That might be what's best for the organization that wants to pivot in, say, from a reactive mode to a proactive mode, and how they're managing real estate and how they're using AI to support decision making.
Great. And Robert, from a compliance regulatory perspective, what should leaders keep in mind when they are rethinking their operating models?
Yeah, I mean, I've been away from public practice for 5 years now, so I might be a bit rusty, but I think there's 3 aspects to it. One is, again, when we're talking about AI and data intelligence, and you talked about AI readiness, there's the auditability aspect, right? And the ability to show why decisions were made, what data was in, what data informed it, who ultimately owned the outcome. The second piece, I would say, is the data integrity, right? And sort of, I think organizations are going to need to establish one single source of truth, right? With clear stewardship and continuity of asset history. And then the third piece is really about the decision governance, right? And we see it already. We're moving towards a model where algorithms can trigger actions or surface recommendations, but humans still need to define the rules, right? The risk posture, the accountability framework. And so, the role of leadership is going to shift from approving every transaction to governing the system that makes them possible, right? And again, I'm going to link this back to the process. I think new processes are going to get created, but you need to have the governance, the accountability, and the control around how you make decisions.
Great. And jumping to the next one, given both of your experiences and depth in the Canadian and North American public and private sectors, Kevin, what are a few things the private sector could learn from public organizations?
Yeah, great question. I would say that whether we're talking to a public sector or a private sector CRE team, the challenges are the same. I'd never see any changes or disparate solutions. What I do find is that the level of intellect in and around sustainability, whether it's managing your portfolio, et cetera, is amazing in Canada. We have some really outstanding real estate professionals that know their stuff, but the way they make decisions, et cetera, and the challenges that they face are very similar. Challenges with data, challenges with supporting out, challenges with making the business case for enough money for a capital program, executing on that capital program, labor market, and others not. There's immigration policy has shifted such that, maybe skilled labor in this particular area, the federal government needs to focus there to help us build the infrastructure, and kind of pivot the supply chains from going north, south to east, west, et cetera. Lots going on, but the challenges are always very similar.
That's very interesting. And Robert, what could private learn from public?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Kevin mentioned about the challenges being the same, I think that's that makes sense. I think what the private sector does well is around speed, prioritization, decision clarity. Decisions are increasingly data informed. They're tied to direct outcomes. I think we're also seeing parts of the public sector already moving in this direction, right? Using technology analytics, consolidation strategies, responding faster to the changing workforce needs and footprint pressures, right? While still protecting the broader service mission. I think that's been key. And the other important shift, I think, is treating space less as a fixed asset, but more as a flexible resource that creates multiple forms of value, whether it's financial, social, or community-based. So that would be my response.
Great. And our last rapid-fire question, in a quick phrase, if each of you could state what the one thing that leaders can do in the next 90 days to future-proof their portfolio. Maybe Robert?
I mean, if I had to suggest one practical step, it'd probably be focus on creating that sort of single source of truth, so that single trusted foundation for the decision making across your portfolio.
Kevin?
Yeah, I would say, just in other words, agree with Robert. It's around getting data to lead, getting it into the hands of the working level folks, getting the data they need to make good decisions at the working level versus data to report. And if you do that, and they're feeding that the systems, etc., you're gonna be able to do, cut your costs. You're going to be able to ensure that your capital program's optimized, your portfolio is optimized, etc. All of those elements.
That's great. That's great. Well, that was done in true rapid fire style. So thank you both. Really appreciate the responses. And thank you for your time and your engagement. And of course, your leadership in shaping commercial real estate as we get into this year and beyond. We talked about disciplined optimization. We talked about data-led decisions. We talked about operating model design, but clearly it comes down to effective leadership as well. 2026, as I'm learning, won't reward those who wait for clarity, but it'll reward those who act with intention. So thanks to everyone who joined us, and we hope you found some useful elements to take away here. As you'll see on the screen, there's a quick checklist here to pressure test your portfolio, your operating model, and your readiness. But feel free to reach out to any of us that you listened to in the call today, and we'd be happy to take conversations further. And with that, I will wrap us up here with under a minute to spare. And maybe while you're with us, there is another webinar also coming out pretty soon around decision intelligence and AI-led product stack transformations in March. So please use the QR code on the screen to register if you have the time. And we look forward to seeing you in more such sessions. Thank you again, Kevin, for joining us. Thank you, Robert. And thanks to the Nakisa marketing team for putting together such a great event on such a short notice. Appreciate everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Ashwath. It's good to see you, Robert. Take care, pal.
Nice seeing you, Kevin.